but it's not a secret I keep. It's just not something I guess even thought about, because it's part of me, and, you know, they had a question, I would have answered it.
Hey everybody, it's Ben. Awesome show today because we are joined by a high school teacher named Tristyn who has Tourette Syndrome. And as I say that, I know you're generating questions in your mind about her experiences as such. And we're going to answer those questions today. I'm pretty much kind of mostly back to normal with my podcast production setup, which suffered a major setback recently. No need to get back into that. But I want to give a proper shout out to Yuri at Waves Audio for helping me rebuild my audio software and get this podcast back on track. Waves is a company that makes some of the software I use to create this podcast, and they have an amazing customer support team. Thanks, Waves. This is your unsolicited endorsement. So check this out. I was editing this episode and writing notes about it, and one of the things I wrote down was how our guest today describes the need or the urge to tick. You know, the way of explaining it to people so they understand. And we often say things like, you know, think of it like a really bad itch that you absolutely need to scratch, and then you scratch it because you can't help it. And another one is telling people it's like, try not to blink. You can try to hold back, but you'll fail. The need that you have to blink is comparable to the need that I have to tick. That kind of thing. So I asked folks on Twitter and Facebook what else they had. You know, what other analogies get the message across? I love a good analogy, and here are a few selections from the multitude of responses. We'll start with Laura from the amazing Tourette Problems account. She says this: I often let people try the not blinking one and add that it's 10 times worse and full body, but also describe it as feeling a mosquito or other insect on your arm and not being allowed to slap it off. Michael says, kind of like being a puppet, can seem like someone else is controlling your body. You can try to fight against it, but ultimately that puppeteer is going to pull that string. Someone going by the name The Beardless One says, I describe it like sneezing. Sometimes it happens before you know it's going to happen. Other times you can feel it coming. Others it just won't come. Jaleesa says, and you'll remember Jaleesa from the first episode of this season. She says, for me, the only comparable sensation is that feeling when you've been holding your breath for a while and you're just getting to the point where you need to breathe. All right, I've got some rhyming names coming up. Gary says, trying not to flinch when your toast pops in the toaster. You can practice and get better at it, but you still usually can't help it even when you know it's coming. I really love that one from Gary. Jerry says, trying to hold in a fart. Mary says, not coughing when you have to cough. Okay, so moving on to Sandy. She says, it's like when you get a song in your head and you can't get it out, except I have 12 songs all at once, and it doesn't stop. Ever. I love that one too, which kind of captures a different angle on Tourette Syndrome and what it's like to have it. Okay, next, someone named Jolanda or Yolanda. I should have gotten clarification first, but she says, don't yawn. Whatever you do, don't yawn. If you say that to people, they will suddenly get the urge to yawn. The more they try not to yawn, the more they won't be able to stop themselves. I find that's the best way of showing people firsthand what I go through to some extent all day, every day. Grace says, holding your breath, you have to breathe eventually, just like you have to tick eventually. That's one I've heard. The way I describe it personally is it's like a rush of adrenaline, and I have to let it out in that certain way, which is a tick, or I feel like I'm going crazy on the inside. All right, thank you, Grace. I like this one a lot from Tyler. He says, rain on a summer day, but you had hiking plans. You cannot control the weather. It just happens. Yeah, that's a really cool one from Tyler. Follow him on Twitter, by the way. His handle is Tourette TV. Tyler puts up videos describing his experience with Tourette Syndrome, and they're definitely worth watching. All right, so Chelsea says, like a wire is touching a certain muscle or body part, or vocal cords, diaphragm, and it's delivering just enough voltage to tingle and feel uncomfortable. I have to tick in order to shake off the wire. So that one's really interesting. We'll do one more from Rachel, who says, you were in a really important meeting and need to wee badly. No opportunity to leave. Can you stop thinking about it? A good one for kids is to ask them to sit quietly and not think about monkeys for the next 3 minutes. Thank you, Rachel. There were a good number more that were variations on what we just heard. But thanks to the many, many people who weighed in and gave me, and hopefully you, a few more ways of explaining uncontrollable tics to the uninitiated. All right, so one last thing I got before we get on to the main part of the episode. It's a piece of mail I got from someone named Hillary, and she's looking for advice that you guys might be able to give. Here's what she had to say. My name is Hillary, and I'm a teenager. I've been doctor diagnosed with TS very recently, but my parents are having a hard time with it. They sort of accepted it at first, but now they don't believe it. They just think I have bad habits. Before going to the doctor, I did research to find out more about Tourette's, and related to all of it. My parents say they haven't seen any tics, but I know this isn't really true, since they've asked me to stop a couple times. I have got better at hiding it, so that could be the problem. I also got diagnosed with ADD, but my parents don't think that could be true because I have good grades, and they think I don't have to work for it. I often come home from school with extra homework because I can't focus enough to get it done in class, but they just say how everyone gets distracted sometimes. I just wanted to ask for any advice you could give. Thank you so much for your amazing podcast. It has helped me, even as a teenager, relate to so much in other people. And that's from Hillary. So yeah, I mean, that's a really big deal, trying to break through and explain what you deal with and the frustration that follows when people don't hear you out, especially your parents, and the compounding negatives that can follow that. Hillary, stay positive. First thing I'll say is stay positive. You've got a legion of people in the TS community supporting you and ready to listen. There's a great discussion group for this podcast called the Tourette's Podcast Discussion Group. That's on Facebook. You can find a lot of people to relate to there. There's a bunch of other Facebook groups regarding Tourette Syndrome. So you've got a very active community. But you, the listener, please reach out with your advice for Hillary, and I'll read it back to her on the show. And I do think it's important for me to read it on the show because other people listening might be in a similar position and are looking for similar answers. So here's what you do. Send me an email. The address is tourettespodcast@gmail.com. You can type it out, or you can email me a voice memo from your phone if you want. Just speak your answer into your phone, save that voice memo, email it to tourettespodcast@gmail.com. So I can just drop that file right into the episode. That works nicely, but no sweat either way. Just respond in whatever medium you like. And I thank you in advance for your help. All right, so let's get to our conversation today with Tristyn. She's a world history high school teacher with Tourette Syndrome. We talk about how her students process that, how they kind of get to know her and her tics, and how they come to know TS beyond the stereotypes and all the associated life lessons that come with better understanding something by experiencing it firsthand. Let me say real quick, there are a couple moments in the latter part of our talk where we have a bit of a bad phone signal and it kind of fizzles out a little bit. But I've edited everything the best I can to make sure it comes through as clearly as possible. So just bear with these very brief moments where it kind of crackles out a little bit. We recover really fast, and it doesn't cut down on the quality or value of this conversation, which is really great. Here's me and Tristyn. Could you state your name and where you live and what you do?
Yeah, my name is Tristyn Holtzauer, and I live in Centerville, Virginia, outside of D.C., and I'm a high school teacher, teach world history.
How long have you been a high school teacher?
This is actually my 4th year in high school.
So, and again, this is the kind of thing that we could build up to, but I just kind of want to dive in with you being a high school teacher who has Tourette Syndrome. I get a lot of, questions from parents, and they, their child was recently diagnosed and they're going through school and they're kind of wondering how it's going to go. And that's sort of typically where the curiosity is, how does my child navigate school? But with you being a teacher, what are the dynamics there? Are you kind of open about having Tourette syndrome? Do your students know? Do your colleagues know? What's it like?
Yeah, so I didn't used to be open about it at all. But now I'm very open with my students and even my coworkers. And even when I tell them, sometimes they're shocked. Oh, we didn't know you had it. And then they look out for the things I've told them. I mean, you didn't notice I did this, and I feel them watch me after, for a week after I tell them. They stare at me. Yeah, but no, I do explain to my students pretty early on. I say, when I get anxious or get stressed, you guys, I'm sure, have certain things that you do. Here's the things I do when I get anxious or stressed.
Mm-hmm.
And then I tell them what it feels like to me, and how I've determined how to explain to someone what it feels like is trying to hold your eyes open for an extended period of time and don't blink.
Yeah.
And no matter what you do, don't blink. And then, okay, fine, you can finally blink. And when you do, it's harder, or you have to blink more. And I tell them if I hold a tick, it feels like that to me. And if I hold it too long, I have to do it harder, or I have to do it multiple times. And that seems what they can understand, why I can't hold them, or I can't, control them in a way.
Yeah, that's one of the best explanations I've heard. Just in the sort of requirement that you tick, and if you if you try to put it off, then it kind of snowballs. And
yeah.
So, how do you kind of? I guess students don't know, going into the first day of class at beginning of school. How do you kind of broach this, and do you do it, right up front, or do you kind of wait for something to come up where a kid has a question, or you can tell that they're noticing something about you?
I kind of wait till it comes up naturally, because if I just tell them, then they'll be like, "Oh, I'm going to watch you," and not pay attention to what's happening in the room. But normally, the kids will notice. Like, it's mostly. Lately, it's been like head nods. So this year, that's how I brought it up. I was doing a head nod. I'm like, no, I wasn't telling you yes. I was just trying to explain something else.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of happens organically. Yeah.
How do the kids handle it? Are they? I mean, high school is a time where, just thinking back, my high school years, I was not the most mature person in the world. Even with someone who has Tourette syndrome, who should be, kind of empathetic, but how are they digesting it?
Well, every kid is different. Most are pretty accepting. Luckily, I teach in an area where like the student population is they're very nice. They're very accepting of each other as well as their teachers. It just depends on the individual, but mostly I get, "Oh, are you going to start cussing at us?" And I'm like, "No, that's something different. That's copper lolly." And then we get into discussion. Uh-huh. So yeah, they are 14-year-olds. So, I teach ninth grade, and it's just, you just got to put yourself out there and hope that they are accepting and can learn from it, because everybody has their thing, and that's just my thing. And as the year goes, we build up a relationship, and kids are pretty accepting of it, or at least I can tell.
Yeah, and with the number of kids you teach, especially over the years, I mean, that's a lot of kids who were kind of advancing in the world with a better understanding of what something like this is. I mean, I think that you're in a really unique position to, there's just a really good lesson in kind of challenges and kind of being open about it. But I'm curious too, when you became a teacher, is this something that the school district knew coming in, or did you feel like you had to kind of divulge that, or did this come up later?
It came up later. So I didn't. So through my hiring process, when I went to this county that I'm currently in, I never felt I had to disclose that. They never asked. I guess I do a pretty good job of, I wouldn't say hiding it, but I guess I do a pretty good job of controlling it to a point. Because I've been living with this for like 20 years now. So yeah. But no, I guess because they're not always in the classroom, like people that observe me aren't always even in the classroom, but it's not a secret I keep. It's just not something I guess even thought about, because it's part of me, and, they had a question, I would have answered it.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers your question. That's the only thing I can think of.
Yeah, it does. And the reason I'm asking, is a lot of people I talk to definitely have some anxiety when it comes to, their careers, and are they going to be labeled as or mislabeled as a problem or something we have to keep an eye on? Or we got this guy interviewing with us and he has Tourette syndrome. Is that going to be a problem for our company? And just because of the misunderstandings out there, and I never told my bosses when it came to any job interviews. I never would have, because I would just assume that I would just write myself off because of the misunderstanding that I would expect. When it comes up, did you find acceptance, or did you find that they were kind of regarding you in a different way, or being cautious, or what was that like?
Well, going back to what you were talking about was being written off. Yeah, I definitely had that fear. And I think that's why I also disclosed it. Like I tried really hard not to cause any weird feeling during interviews or anything, because, my tics. So yeah, I definitely feel that. And it was a fear of mine getting out of college and being like, oh, I have to go interview with people and go out of a secure environment. But yeah, when I did disclose it to my colleagues, I was pretty accepting, mostly shock. And with other people, it's like, oh, tell me more about that. What, or just misunderstanding and then clarification. And I don't know, I found in my adult world, people tend to be more accepting because you have the confidence to like explain what it is.
Yeah.
You have words to put with what it is you have and what it is that you do.
What about before you became a teacher? Were you open about it with your friends or, social life, relationships, things like that? Or
that's a good question. So I was pretty isolated for a long time because of that, because I'm from a small town. And not to say like the people aren't educated or anything. It's not that. It's just everyone knows everyone and rumors can spread and, all this stuff. And I just was always nervous about putting myself out there, especially when I had this odd thing about myself. Well, it's not odd, but you know what I mean? When I was
I know exactly what you mean.
Odd. I isolated myself, and then I went off to school, and I was in a new place, and I fell into that cycle again of trying to isolate myself, and I didn't even go to school to be a teacher. Like, that wasn't what I wanted to do in the beginning at all. I just fell into it. But, so even in college, I would isolate myself, and then because I started to school, I went to Shepherd University and I went to actually do historical preservation, like in regards to like archaeology. And I took an education class and I was like, oh, this is what I want to do. Oh, can I actually get in front of people and teach? Like, I'm the kind of person who hated all eyes on them. Now it's my living. There's 25 plus 14-year-olds eyes on me all the time. So it was just very strange because I didn't really open up to my friends. My best friend in college knew. My education professors knew, but I wasn't really open about it. I kind of wanted to just push it aside and hoped it went away.
Yeah, that's another good point too, is when you're a child and your parents are told, there's this diagnosis, but sometimes it kind of goes away as you get older, which, we definitely know is not always the case.
Yeah.
But I think that does also inspire a lot of people to kind of keep a lid on it because it's something that might just kind of evaporate anyway. And this is a problem that's going to work itself out. No need to, but the sort of complication or problem with that is that you're not really kind of teaching yourself to kind of self-accept and really explore it and learn it and accept it. And, what were you diagnosed very young, or how did that come about?
Okay, so actually, since I wrote to you the first time, I always assumed like, oh, I was diagnosed when I was 8 years old because I remember the process from my point of view. And then since I talked to you, I've spoken to my grandmother about it because she was there the whole time all this was happening, and she painted a completely different story than I thought. So apparently, I was showing signs from even earlier than 8, but I was in a car accident, and I guess that stress brought on more. Like, it brought it on more because she always said that it was caused by stress and anxiety, and that's true. I mean, that's what I have it the most when I'm stressed or anxious. Hence why being a teacher, maybe not that I'm just kidding. And then apparently she saw a TV show. This was a documentary about a child with Tourette's. There was a TV show or documentary. And my family just started to refer to it, oh, those are Tristyn's tics. And it wasn't until later on that I got completely diagnosed. And that was the doctor at the University of Kentucky. So that wasn't until I was probably later on, 12, 13.
Okay.
Yeah, so later than I even thought. Yeah. Oh, and then, oh man, but I thought it was when I had had him AIDS, but wasn't fully diagnosed.
Yeah.
I don't know what that was about.
With the diagnosis, I mean, was there any comfort in that and kind of having it down on paper, or did it seem like, okay, there's here's my challenge and I got to figure out how to deal with it in life, or Do you remember what you were thinking at the time?
I think when I came to terms with it was I did a study for TSA USA when I was about 18. So my family actually was referred to a study, I guess the Cincinnati Children's Hospital was doing, and they took my paternal bloodline and they took all of our blood because me and my cousin both have Tourette syndrome. And he's a freshman right now in college. But so they took blood from all of us, and then they did a study on me for about 3 days where they did MRIs and they did brain scans and hooked up these, I don't know, I used to call them like alien probes to my brain. And watch different things.
I had the same thing. I mean, this is bringing back memories for me too.
Where you could see your brain on the screen, and you could see it like this part will light up when you do this and that kind of thing.
I don't remember specifically that, but I do remember I was at UNC, University of North Carolina, and they took a lot of blood from me and they ran a lot of tests on me. And I remember these like probes or these sort of like suction cup type things where they put some cream on your skin, they make it stick. And then I remember them telling me to close my eyes and they would project different colors that I would, I guess, kind of, observe through my eyelids, but they would, I don't remember exactly what they asked me, but they basically, they threw a whole bunch of stimuli at me and recorded my reactions, whether it was just answering questions about something or, I mean, this is when I was like 11. I don't have too clear a memory of it. I can't remember if this was specifically something that was being studied and handed to the Tourette Association. And I think that led to, from there, different kinds of medication that my doctor tried with me. And I don't know, it was just a series of kind of unsuccesses from that point on. But so where did that go for you?
That's where it went. I tried, like you said, the medication. They tried so many.
Yeah.
But I got fed up with it because there wasn't anything. I don't know if there is like specifically for Tourette's, but there wasn't when I was like 12, 13, 14. No, there wasn't anything. They tried a bunch of things. I remember one thing this doctor told me. He said, "Oh, well, a side effect of this could be you have tremors in your hands." I'm like permanent? And he said, "Yeah." And I'm like, "I'm fine with just having them like every now and then, not going forever." It's so odd, but hopefully, these studies will go somewhere someday. I don't remember anything ever coming out of that. I remember after that, I was like, I'd do more studies, but I'd never take any more medication.
What we typically hear with medication, or at least the people I talk to on this podcast and citing my own experiences, is that because it is kind of off-label and there's not a medication, certainly wasn't at the time, that was, something specifically formulated for Tourette syndrome. It was just something that was maybe intended for something else, and it might also help people with Tourette syndrome deal with their tics. And what we typically hear is like, oh, it turned me into a zombie, or I was just not the person I liked. And were those effects kind of repeated with you?
Yep, exactly. And I remember one of them caused weight gain.
Yep. Yeah, me too.
A lot of weight gain. I remember that one. And then, I remember one, I don't know the names of any of these.
Well, anafranil was one that I was on that I think gave me the most problems, and I definitely gained a lot of weight. And there were some other things going on that I was just, this is not worth it. I would rather try to live with Tourette syndrome and again, find ways to mask my tics because I'm not going to be socially open with it. But I'm going to try to kind of, engage life from that angle versus having this medication that is just kind of turning me into somebody I didn't know and certainly didn't resemble prior. So
yeah, it's better to be who we actually are.
Yeah. What kinds of tics were you dealing with? I know they fluctuate, but when tics presented with you, what were they like? You mentioned head nods and things like that in the context of the classroom, but what about early on?
So early on, I remember there being a lot of vocal tics, and it was like a lot of like clicking. Does that make sense? Like throat clicking. Or like,
I have a tic like that now.
Clearing. Yeah. Last time I had a bad throat when I was in college, but I remember it was a lot of blinking early on, like in hard blinks. And a lot of like head jerks. Like when I say head nodding, it's like a head jerk back really quick. Have you ever that one where it's like?
Oh yeah, definitely. will do this thing where I sort of tense up my neck simultaneously as I kind of jerk my head. So it kind of looks like a real rigid object kind of vibrating for a second and kind of whipping back into place. That was sort of my head and neck tick for a long time. In addition to this other one where I would have to sort of like, it's almost like I'm scooping my head upward, if that makes any sense, to where I kind of move my jaw forward in a way where the hair at the back of my head sort of touches the top like protruding bone of my spine. If I'm painting the picture the right way, that was one I had badly when I was a kid. And I just, that's one that even when I tried to sleep, I mean, you can't sleep when you're doing that. No. And I wish that went away.
Yeah, no, I definitely know which one that one you're talking about there. But yeah, it was mostly neck and head. And I don't know if that was just, I've heard that, when you're younger, it sort of like begins higher up. And as you get older, you might have tics like lower down. And like even now I have like an arm one where I like just jerk my arm because I'm trying to pop. I'm trying to pop my arm. It's getting bad if my husband's around and I hit him. Like, I'm sorry, it was my tick.
Yeah.
If I get mad at him, I can blow him out. I'm kidding.
It's funny because I kind of, so I was traveling recently and I mentioned in the last episode previous to us speaking right now where I was kind of suppressing my tics when I was in the airport because I didn't want to be noticed.
Yeah.
But I did develop a new tic at that time and it was an arm jerking tic where I would kind of sort of throw out my arm to where my hand kind of, it's almost like a hand version of that head tic I was talking about, where I sort of like whip out my palm a little bit. And visually, it's me kind of holding a drumstick and hitting a cymbal. That's kind of what I picture in my mind as I'm doing it. And I don't think that inspired the tic. I just think that's what the tic made me picture while I was doing it.
Yeah.
And I'm so I was about to say that I haven't really done that one since I got back from the airport, but now I'm doing it again, just talking about it.
No, when I talk about, like when I was telling you what I'm doing, I was doing them. As I was talking to you about them.
Yeah.
And it's just like even thinking about them.
Does that happen to you a lot where we're talking about tics kind of makes them worse? Or if you hear about other tics, you kind of adopt them? Or does it work that way with you?
Yeah, it does. I remember I was listening, I think it was even the first episode. There was a lady, I don't know if it was Melissa or Michelle, that you guys were talking about the shared tic that you had with the ear popping.
Oh, Maddie. Yeah. Oh, man. Yeah.
I was like, no. So I would have to take a hiatus from certain episodes. I'm like, oh no, I'm going to start doing certain things. But that's just a thing that happens.
Yeah, this is, I guess, where I have to apologize to the audience for any sort of tics that this podcast has inspired. But that one, that ear popping tic in particular went away for a little bit, I think between season 1 and season 2, and it is back furiously now. And out of every tic I've ever had, that's the one where I would, I wouldn't mind trying medication to see if I could just kind of cool that one out. Because I am kind of worried about my hearing. I'm kind of an audio junkie. I like producing podcasts. I like recording music. I love listening to music and field recordings and audio and all that. It's a huge pleasure in my life. And I'm kind of worried that tic in my left ear only, it doesn't happen in my right, is going to have something to say about that at some point. When I was talking with Ed Buckner a few episodes back, the meteorologist, his eardrum collapsed because of a tic that he had that was impacting his ear. And I've sort of developed these fears that, as much as I am a Tourette Syndrome warrior now, and I'm proud, of what I have and how I've dealt with it, that is one where I'm like, okay, there are some downsides to this thing. That's a tic I'm not going to accept, and I'm going to see because I can't integrate that in my life. That it's not a positive. I have to see if I can wish that it goes away on its own and pray to the Tourette gods, and that I can swap it out or trade it up for something else or divert it. Or have you ever tried doing that? Trying to influence your tics or divert your tics into something else?
I absolutely have. So one of my doctors gave me a tip that I still use today. He said that if I feel like I need to have a tic in one side of my body, like do it in the opposite side. And even though it's the same tic, so that wouldn't work for your ear problem. But but yeah, I have done that, and it seems to, I can do that. I can alter it. And if I have vocal tics, though, I can never stop those. I can never change those. But yeah, if it's like an arm tic or something, I can alter it through my other arm. And I don't know if that just comes from practice in a way. I don't know. I don't want to say practice, but I don't know. I just feel like I found ways to control them like that. Yeah.
Do you find that, I guess professionally, and I've said this on the podcast before, where I used to be a news reporter, and it was very stressful, and just so many sort of moving dynamics and elements and deadlines and pressures and all that would make my tics worse. Do you, in the classroom, are you? Do you feel a pressure that does influence your tics or makes them worse versus when you're just kind of in your own personal time?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I do have to overcome those at some point. Because I'm with students like all the time during the day. I teach in a county that does block scheduling. So instead of 48 minutes break, it is 90 minutes break, 90 minutes break. So I'm with them 90 minutes, and it's really hard to sort of not feel that, right? Because they need you all the time, all those 90 minutes. And yeah, teaching is a very stressful job. And so sometimes I will try to hold them, air quotes, hold them. But like if I'm home working on something and it's very stressful, and like I'm creating lesson plans, or can't figure out a problem, I'm trying to think through. My husband will notice that my tics are worse. And they're always worse when I'm stressed or have a deadline and things like that. But yeah, they can be worse in the classroom unless I am very aware of myself. But being a teacher, sure, you can be aware of yourself, but you also have to be aware of the other 25 people in the room, because like you're there to teach them, you're there to protect them. You don't have time for yourself. You don't have time for that awareness anymore of yourself that you used to. So I probably took more than I think at work.
Well, have you ever had any students who you can kind of relate to in that regard, or maybe not something as convenient as a child in the classroom who has Tourette syndrome? Have you interacted with other kids at the school who have Tourette syndrome?
So I was a long-term sub at a middle school before I moved on to high school, and I did. I've only had one student, and he was a sixth grader, and he had Tourette's, and it was my first interaction ever with a student who had it. And I sat him down one day and I told him, like, I know what you're doing. And he would have the worst tics, like excessive blinking. He would make these clearing noises a lot. And I started to develop clearing noises as well, being around him every day. And I told him, I also have it. And, he behaved for me better. Not that he didn't behave before. I just think he also had some challenges in the classroom, because I don't know if a teacher had ever like tried to bond with him or just wrote him out. I don't know his background, but I remember him just being wonderful and just sharing that with him. It was pretty great. And I do think about him from time to time, because some students I've actually met that had Tourette's before and have been diagnosed. But I have had students that have OCD, ADHD, ADD. I have a student right now who has tics, not full-blown Tourette's, but he has tics. But it's just, I think it makes me more aware of what they're going through.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I remember being them. And, I always tell them, if you need to get up and take a walk, go take a walk to get a drink of water. Just get up and move. You don't have to be restrained to your seat all the time. That's
awesome that, you give, and we've talked about this in past episodes, where it really counts for a lot to kind of give that flexibility. I would have performed way better in school had I had that breathing room that you're giving kids who are going to benefit from that. And
Yeah.
I mean, and what you were saying too with the student who had Tourette syndrome being a great kid around you, that feeling of having somebody who's on your team is, I mean, that's just priceless. I didn't have that. There were a couple teachers I had when I was a little kid who they were cool, they were understanding, they tried to work with me, but it was still, they didn't have all the answers for me, and I didn't have them either, and nobody did. We didn't know what to do. But you kind of, being able to cite your past and knowing what happened with you in school and what would have helped you and what hurt you, and knowing what to stay away from, and then kind of, rolling that wisdom into your classroom probably helps a lot of kids who don't have Tourette syndrome or haven't been diagnosed with anything. I mean, it's just, that seems to be a better way to kind of go about it, and more of an empathetic way to deal with kids who are going through a really, transitional period in their lives.
Yeah, I appreciate that. No, I think so too. And I think that not having teachers that were that flexible with me when I was younger has made me a more flexible teacher with other students, because like, oh, this would have been me if, I were you, 10 plus years ago. But I don't know, if I can just make it better for one kid, that's all I want to do.
So I was saying earlier that I get a lot of emails from parents who just found the podcast. They were Googling, and their child was, maybe they're 7, 8 years old. They've been diagnosed with Tourette syndrome. They don't really know what it is in terms of, having much experience with it. There's a big mystery ahead when it comes to school and all that. Do you have any advice for parents when it comes to maybe how they should talk to their teachers and say, because I think, again, what we were talking about earlier with job interviews and everything like that, there's also kind of a fear. Maybe we shouldn't tell this teacher that, or shouldn't tell the school district that he has Tourette syndrome, because they might be taken out of the standard education class and put into an environment that they think is right for him, but is not. And, how do we talk to our teachers? How do we talk to our school district and all that? I mean, do you have any thoughts on kind of that engagement and that communication with children and kind of getting into the mix of things at school with Tourette syndrome being brought along?
So, yeah, I know the fear of, having your child labeled is not something a parent wants to do, but letting the school district know, letting the school know, or just the teacher, can go a long way. I mean, as long as you let them know this is not something that infects your child intellectually. No, it doesn't do that at all. Just educating the teacher, letting the student educate their peers is also helpful. I remember TSA USA used to have this printable book that you could pass out to the class to let students know what it is, what it is that's going on. And I think just educating people will make them much more aware. And I don't think special ed, their goal isn't really to want to place students in certain classes that don't need to be there. So school system has come a long way with that sort of thing. I've definitely seen it work in a very positive way. So I think just, letting the teacher know, letting the class know, because you want to prevent that bullying situation. I know I faced it. I don't know if you did, but just it's that lack of understanding that can cause a child to be labeled and picked on. We have IEPs, individualized educational plans. I know on the high school level, I'm sure on the middle school or elementary school level also, where it just has plans in place for students who might have something they need to get up and, move every so often or have extended time on tests. Doesn't mean they're in a different class than their peers. It just means that they might get a little extra of what they need, and that's something to ask the school about, for sure.
All this is really beneficial to hear, because I don't have a close understanding of how, kind of schools operate these days and what the norms are and how it's different from when I was growing up or when I was in high school.
Yeah, no, it absolutely has changed since I was in school, because like we talked about previously, I didn't have the words to explain what was happening to me. And, nobody really spoke to my teachers about everything that was happening. And so when students would come up and, do something, to like blink in front of me and then walk away and laugh, or, point out what I was doing was odd or weird or what was wrong with me. I didn't know how to explain it, and sometimes kids need that advocate.
I mean, is that a thing you've come to expect with, because you got every year you got a new class of kids coming in. I guess you've gotten better at knowing or anticipating at least how they're going to regard you. Do you find that, and we've kind of talked about this a little bit, but still curious as to how the kids handle it. And I know it's different from student to student, but have you kind of detected that kids will kind of mock or make fun of you in a way? And have you gotten better at knowing how to deal with that kind of thing?
Oh, yeah. So my classroom is a very welcoming classroom, and we don't let disrespect dictate the classroom. So if a student is being disrespectful, they will be asked to leave my classroom until they can come back with a little more manners, we should say.
Right.
And, sometimes it will have me go into the hallway and have a conversation with them. But they don't do it again. They don't like to be told to leave the classroom. So, so they know pretty early on that that's the standard I set, and they're not going to be rude or disrespectful to a lot of people in my class. So, but you still have the people that push it. You still have. Yeah. Because they are 14-year-olds. But no, mostly if you talk to them and you educate them, they're not going to make fun of you something you can't help. What I was talking about was just disrespect as a whole, as in mocking someone for something that isn't something that is. It's mocking someone for something that they can't control, or for their culture, or who they are. I mean, that's just something we gotta get past and just move on.
Thanks for listening. Get in touch and let us know what you thought of this episode. Again, you can do that at the Tourette's Podcast discussion group on Facebook, which more and more people are joining all the time. It's a closed discussion group where members can talk about TS in their own lives or in regard to what they heard on this podcast that piqued their interest. Just ask permission to join and answer the required questions, which basically just kind of ask you what your connection is to Tourette Syndrome, and we'll approve you. Thanks, as always, to Sophia, our moderator and admin at the Tourette's Podcast discussion group. Otherwise, you can get me at tourettespodcast@gmail.com or at tourettespod on Twitter. So we're plotting forward with Season 2, now in the double digits. We'll see you next week with Episode 11. Thanks again. This is Ben.